Hey everybody, it's Skylar from the Randy Smith team. Ellie Beckstrand with me as well. Today we've got a special guest. It's Eric Barnes from the Elder Care Law Firm. Eric, how you doing today?
I'm good, thanks.
Thanks for joining us. We're super happy, super excited that you're with us. Today we're going to be talking about all things Medicaid planning. Eric is the best. He's a specialist. He's been doing it for years, helping seniors to navigate the world of asset management and retirement, specifically with Medicare, with Medicaid, helping them implement strategies to protect their assets in whatever ways that they can, and being a great resource to seniors. So we also have Ellie Beckstrand, our resident senior real estate specialist, who specializes in helping seniors buy and sell their homes and strategize with them as well when they're at various stages of the asset management life cycle. So without further ado, I'm going to kind of ask various questions that our audience members have had, um, things that come up frequently when we're talking with this kind of client. And if you don't mind, Eric, is it okay if we go ahead and get started with a couple of these questions?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, great. So my first question for you is, what is Medicaid planning and why would somebody need an attorney to help them with that?
Okay, that's a great question. Uh, when we look at seniors and the risks that face people as they age, probably the largest risk is that you'll have a significant long-term care crisis. And right now, nursing homes cost about $10,000 a month. If you're in assisted living, we're running about $4,500 a month. It can really devastate people who haven't thought ahead and tried to figure out how they're going to deal with that potential crisis. When we're looking at this, there are really two kinds of ways we approach it. One is with pre-planning, and if we can do that in advance and think ahead about what our plan is and how we're going to deal with a long-term care crisis, that's usually the best situation. And I always tell people, look, I don't care what your plan is, just want you to have one, so that when this happens, that you and your family can have peace, as much peace as possible, going through that crisis. And there are a whole continuum of resources that help us address the long-term care crisis. Everything from veterans benefits to Medicare to family care. And Medicaid is just one of those benefits, which is one of the things we're talking more about today. And so in pre-planning, we're looking at all those different resources and figuring out how best to deal with that if it happens to you. Crisis planning, on the other hand, is when you're already in the situation where you're a loved one or you or is in a nursing home, and you're trying to figure out how you're going to preserve something of what you accumulated over the years and not be devastated by this situation. We do all the Medicaid applications for 6 nursing homes in Utah, so we deal a lot with this crisis planning problem, and then we also do quite a bit of pre-planning. But Medicaid, what it does is it comes in and it pays for the care when you can't afford to do so. And when you're incurring those heavy costs, then that's usually the first question that you or your family is going to be asking is, can we qualify for some benefits to help cover that? And so we dig in and try to figure out, okay, how do we navigate the Medicaid rules to preserve and protect what you have and get you eligible as quickly as we can? Now, this is an extremely complex area. I always tease my clients, they say, why does this have to be so complicated? And I say, well, it's called job security for lawyers. We send a bunch of lawyers to Congress, and then they just make these complicated laws, to protect our own professions. But no, I'm just joking. Really, it is extremely complex. And so what we see is, there's times when I've been in the practice where especially early on, where I thought, man, every case is hard. Every case is complicated. I really should pick a different area so that I'm not always having to deal with such complex issues. But that's just the nature of the beast, is that it's complicated. And so when people go and they try to do this on their own or without somebody who knows what they're doing, they usually make some pretty big mistakes. And it can be extremely costly. I mean, you're talking, if you're in a nursing home at $10,000 a month, which is over $300 per day, you don't have to make a very big mistake before it costs you, a lot of money. And usually we're saving people a lot more money than what they ever pay us. But we also then bring them peace of mind and that certainty that, hey, we've got this. We're going to get through this. It's going to be okay. We're going to get some good guidance, that kind of thing. So
Yeah, that's great. That's great. We always recommend trusting professionals. I think it's very similar to selling your house by yourself. Something that we deal with, so a lot of our clients want to sell their homes by themselves, and that's great, if you've had a lot of experience and you can navigate the ins and outs. But again, kind of like you were talking about, if if someone if someone goes into it and doesn't know what they're doing, doesn't understand the market landscape, it could cost them a lot more than they'll ever pay us. And so that resonates with us a little bit as a real estate team too. So
yeah.
um so yeah, my second question here, how does Medicaid eligibility work and what are the income and asset limits?
Yeah, there are a lot of different types of Medicaid. So you always have to be asking, what kind of Medicaid are we trying to be qualified for? What we're talking about today is what we call long-term care Medicaid. And you have traditional long-term care Medicaid, which is nursing home Medicaid. Medicaid in that context only pays for nursing home care. And so, that's the only place you could get dollars for many years. And then Utah has gotten what we call a waiver. So we've gone in and we've asked for some exceptions as a state to be able to get Medicaid dollars to pay for care in assisted living facility context. So we really have those two. We have New Choices Waiver Program for assisted living facilities, and then traditional nursing home or long-term care Medicaid. When we're talking about these benefit programs, there's an asset criteria. If you're single, you can only have $2,000 of what we call countable resources. And so that would not include a home and a car. So you could have a home, you could have a car, and a funeral plan, some other little things that are not countable or that are exempt. But when we look at everything else, including retirement assets like IRAs, 401ks, your bank accounts, annuities, all those things are countable, and you can only have $2,000 worth of those. If you're married, it's a little more generous. It's a little complicated, but you can have anywhere from about 28,000 up to 130,000 is the range, and that again depends on how much you come into it with as a couple. So those are the asset limits. When it comes to income, you just can't be making more money than the cost of the care, because they assume if you're making more money than the cost of the care, then you don't need Medicaid. And that's very different than community-based Medicaid, where they have income caps that you deal with. So those are the eligibility criteria.
And Eric, are there any situations where housing in a car would not be exempt from those asset limits? Is that something that you help your clients learn how they can protect those assets?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that whenever you're applying for Medicaid and you're over 55, you've got to remember that there's two big issues. One is eligibility, and the other is estate recovery. So you can get on Medicaid and have exempt assets like a home or a car, but after you die, then Medicaid is going to come and they're going to put a lien on the home or on the car, and they're going to want to get repaid the dollars that they paid for you out of those properties. And so it's usually good to think about that as well when we do the planning. A lot of times we may want to just make sure we cover it all in the planning rather than just depend on the exemption, because what are we really doing? Just maybe kicking the can down the road, so to speak.
Sure. And I would imagine that there are some strategies that clients can implement to sort of maybe gift or transfer some of the net worth that they've acquired in their home to heirs or otherwise, without having to pay back all of that to the state.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong, I'm not the expert you are, but I would
Yeah.
figure that that's probably part of your prior planning that you
Yeah.
discussed.
I mean, we have a tool bag, we have a lot of different tools in there. These are the different laws that Medicaid has given us that we can use. There's nothing secretive or dishonest or
Totally.
on here. We're just using the laws that Medicaid has given us. And so as we look at these different situations, we just reach into that tool bag and get the ones that apply. But if we have a home, there are some exempt transfer things that we can look at. We can transfer a home to a disabled child. We can transfer a home to a caregiver child, and there's some criteria for that. We can transfer a home to a sibling who has an equity interest in the property and has lived there for a year. So there's these different ways that we might be able to transfer that home without a sanction from Medicaid. But that's always something that we're looking at, both eligibility, can we protect assets now, and then how do we protect them on the back end?
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Okay, and then I've heard that there's a look back period. I don't really know the ins and outs, but as far as the transfer of assets goes, that there's Medicaid for estate recovery that they do a 5-year, I believe, a 5-year look back period. So maybe what is that and how does it affect Medicaid planning?
Yeah, a lot of people know about the 5-year look back rule, and there's a lot of myths that surround it. The best way to understand this rule is that when you're filling out a Medicaid application for long-term care, there's a question, and it says, in the last 5 years, have you given away any of your assets? If you say yes, then you have to tell them about that. They take the value of what you've given away. They divide it by what we call the Medicaid divisor, which is the theoretical average cost of nursing home care in Utah. And that tells us how many months you're locked out of Medicaid. So it really is just that question on the Med app. If you say yes, then you're going to get a sanction. And so if you transferred assets and more than 5 years have passed, you can say no, and there isn't any sanctions for the transfer of assets.
Yeah, so as part of your pre-planning, that's probably something that you discuss with your clients as far as, okay, when do we maybe anticipate that these emergent events might start to happen, and what can we do in the meantime?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Ourselves.
sometimes we're trying to get that 5-year clock started while you're still healthy.
Yeah.
So that we're sort of protected by the time the crisis comes.
Cool. So maybe at this point, or we're kind of talking about asset management a little bit, disposition of your real estate assets in your estate. Ellie, how do you, as a senior real estate specialist, assist your clients with like a normal retail transaction?
So I think that's like what we're doing every day. I think biggest thing right now would want to make sure everybody's on the same page. So normal retail, like if it's just the seller that we're working with, sometimes we're working with a trust. So then we've got attorneys and stuff involved, like Eric. We want to make sure everybody first is on the same page before, because obviously you can't sell a house if the seller doesn't own the house, or if it's in a trust and who's signing for it. You've got to make sure you have all your ducks in a row that way. I think retail market, I think when people think they're going to sell their home, that's going to be the most, I think what comes to people's mind is retail market. You list it on the market. We're here to help get it sold for the most amount of money for the least amount of time, and how like our process works for that. I think that's generally though what people are thinking.
So yeah, that's a good point, Ellie, because there are a lot of situations where people, the house isn't retail ready. There are a lot of situations where
Mac, I don't know what happened.
okay, I'll edit that. Recording's still going. I'll edit that and cut it together and it'll be just fine. So I'm going to start with that question again, and I'll just cut back into it. And 3, 2, 1. So Ellie, obviously there are a lot of situations where retail doesn't really work for a seller in a situation like this, because maybe there's been a lot of deferred maintenance, you know, maybe their spouse has passed away quite some time ago, maybe their health starts to decline, and maybe, you know, it's their children even that are reaching out to somebody like Eric to try to get them into a long-term care setting. And maybe they kind of need it sold really quick, or they don't want to worry about it. And as a normal real estate agent who isn't a senior real estate specialist and doesn't have additional resources for seniors might just say, well, you know, tough luck. You gotta get it ready to sell. I can't sell it in this condition. What other approaches does your team use to help seniors that are in a circumstance like that?
I think a lot of the time, so most of the homes I think we see that are in this situation are gonna be older homes. It's grandma's house hasn't been updated for 50 years. They've lived there. They have accumulated a lot of things. So there's usually a lot of stuff in there. So one of the options is to hire contractors. So we have a giant network of people that we could help get the work done. So we could get it on the retail market. But we also work with some companies who can buy the home and usually close it within 2 weeks. That same company actually will buy the home and let the seller stay in it and lease back. But we also have great investors where we could farm out the home and kind of they buy it as is, they do the work as well. And then you guys, the seller could get out of it as quickly as possible. So there's lots of options that aren't the traditional retail market.
So it sounds like your approach is whatever the client needs. Like, for example, if there's a situation where they're moving into long-term care, they need to liquidate the asset quickly, you've got some options for them. If they have a spouse that needs to stay and they need the equity out of it, but they need a place to live, they could do a lease back. It sounds like your services are very tailored to whatever the client's goals and expectations are.
Yeah, I think every situation is very different. And so it's very, whatever's going to work best for them, family. Because I mean, a lot of the times you have the client is still home and all of their kids are out of state. So it's however it's going to work best for the client.
Well, that's cool. I think it's definitely helpful that you are well connected in the 55 plus sector with different specialists that service this demographic. And I think that that's sort of our value proposition as a team is we're well connected. We see these situations all the time, and we love to make the burden lighter on people in those situations. So Eric, if we could maybe jump back to you, how can we transfer assets or gift them to loved ones without affecting that Medicaid eligibility?
Well, I think that when we do planning, we look at really 3 steps. We talk about spending it, converting it, and gifting it in that order. So first, we send the client to get those things that are that they need, you know, such as dentures, wheelchairs, you know, a big screen TV, whatever they want to make them comfortable. After we've dealt with all of the spending that we can do, then we look at converting assets. So this would be maybe putting accountable money into an exempt home, or in purchasing a vehicle that's exempt, or buying funeral plans, that sort of thing. And then finally, we start talking about gifting. I think your question, you know, sort of presupposes this idea that we if we keep the home on the back end, we are going to get that Medicaid lien, and we are going to have to then pay them back. And so there are many situations where we really do want to go ahead and include the home in some asset protection planning. And some of that depends on how long we think somebody's going to live. You know, how long is this going to go on? What kind of support there is in the family for taking care of the home, interest in the home, that kind of thing. But a lot of times the home really is just kind of a millstone on everybody's necks because it has ongoing costs associated with it. Medicaid's not going to give a budget to pay the taxes and the insurance on that property. Somebody's going to have to keep it up. And if we rent it, then the income that comes from it's going to have to go to the cost of care anyway. So, a lot of times we want to just get out of that home. And if we have disabled children or other disabled people that we want to transfer the home to, we can do that without a sanction. That is tricky because they may have benefits that they're receiving, and we might just be moving it from, out of the pot into the fire. But disabled beneficiaries, a caregiver, child is one of the things that people often overlook. A lot of times a child has moved into the home, has been living there for a significant period of time, providing care for the parent. And we can get a doctor to say that, hey, if this child hadn't moved into the home, then the parent couldn't have stayed there for the last 2 years. If we can do that, we can transfer the home to the caregiver child, and that way get it out of the estate before the parent dies and before the Medicaid lien attaches. And so those are some of the ways that we can protect a home. If we can plan in advance, then if we can get that home out, we use, in some of our pre-planning, we use what we call Medicaid asset protection trusts. And for veterans benefits, we have what we call veterans asset protection trusts. And so this is a way for us to get the home into that trust and start that 5-year clock, so that when the crisis, if we hope it never happens, but if it does happen, then you're not stuck in that home. It's now out of the estate. The 5-year clock is run. We can sell it without any consequences. These trusts are specially drafted so that we don't lose personal residence exemptions or step-up in basis. What that means is that normally people realize that if I sell my home, I'm not expecting that I'll have to pay capital gains tax on that, because each spouse has a $250,000 personal residence exemption. If people gift their home to their kids, they lose that because the kids don't live there. And so the kids don't have that personal residence exemption. But in the trust, in these Medicaid asset protection trusts, we can preserve that personal residence exemption. And then also, if you die owning assets, then they take what you're into that property for, which is what we call basis, and they step that up to the date of death value, so that washes away all that capital appreciation in that property. And so likewise, the trusts allow us to get these homes out and do it in a tax efficient way, so that we get that step up in basis as well. So that then when the crisis hits, we can go ahead and sell the home. We're not stuck with it. We can take those proceeds, keep them in the trust, and then we can get access to them if needed to help take care of the parent. And then eventually, when they're gone, then that can go to the kids.
Great. I appreciate that. That's great info. If you're not convinced that you need a elder care attorney like Eric yet, I don't know. I definitely am very convinced that it's a very convoluted process, and that really you need an elder law attorney like Eric to help you navigate it, because it just seems like you said, big opportunities for big financial mistakes to be made for the lay person who isn't involved in these things every day. So
if I might say one other thing,
go ahead.
I know we're talking about Medicaid, but one of the things that really comes into play here is with veterans benefits. And if you can qualify for that, a lot of people know about what they call the VA pension, or aid and attendance. It's kind of, it's kind of the buzz out there. And one of the things to remember on the home with that is that you don't want to apply for the VA benefits, the pension benefits. If you own a home, you don't want to apply for that until we get that home out of your estate. If you apply for the VA benefit and you don't get the home out of the state, and then you sell the home, then you're going to lose your veterans benefits. And so you have to keep that home for the rest of your life once you go down that road. And so the nice thing about the laws under the VA system is that we can actually put these homes, in many cases, into a veterans asset protection trust. Then you can apply for the VA benefit, get the benefit, and then we can sell that home right away. So we're not stuck in it for the rest of your life. And then we can take those proceeds and use them to supplement care or do everything, whatever else we need. So I don't mean to get too far down that road, because I know you're talking about Medicaid today, but But when we talk about selling homes and working with realtors and that kind of things, one of the biggest mistakes we see people make is they'll sell their home and then all of a sudden they're sitting on all that cash. They're not eligible for the VA benefit. And if we had just got that home off the table before we sold it into that asset protection trust, we could have sold it without a problem and still got the benefit.
Yeah, that's great info as well. And that's why, you know, when we're working with somebody in this situation, we always consult somebody like Eric, because it's very important to us that we don't put you in a bad situation when you're looking to dispose of those assets. So, Eric, maybe the last question, you touched on it really briefly. You were talking about Medicaid spend down. And I know you touched on it briefly, but could you give us a little bit more on that? How can people use Medicaid spend down to their advantage?
So that term spend down is an interesting term, and it causes some confusion. If you're in community-based Medicaid programs, spend down means using the excess income over the income cap and using it on medical bills so that once you pay it down below the income cap, you know, then you can get your Medicaid coverage. And that's not what we're talking about when we're talking about long-term care spend down. We're talking about when you have too many resources and you're trying to get Medicaid eligible. And so we see these cases all the time because of the work we do with nursing homes. And say we have somebody that has an extra $60,000 in their account and they can only have two. And of course, at $10,000 a month, that's not going to last very long. And what can we do to make the best out of that? And usually we're looking at having a meeting with our client. This is really not an expensive type of planning. A lot of times in one meeting, we can give a task list to the client to go out and do these steps, and then you'll be eligible. And so we'll show them all the different ways that they can, quote unquote, spend down that money. And then they come up with what they want to use. You know, they pick and choose from those different methods and come up with a plan, and then they go out and they get that done. But an example would be, you know, buying a funeral plan. You know, everybody's going to have to get buried at some point or cremated or whatever. And so we can pay for that. We can also buy what we call burial space items for family members. A lot of people don't realize that's there, and we really can spend a lot of money on that if we want to. We can buy these things like caskets, vaults, plots, headstones, anything physical that's associated with the burying of somebody or a cremation. We can buy those things for spouses, for yourself, obviously. You can plan for yourself and for your spouse, but you can also buy them for your children, your children's spouses, your parents' spouses. And so, we've had plans where we've had $100,000, you know, that we were able to put a whole family set of funeral plans together with that. So that's an example. You know, buying a car. A lot of people say, well, what do I need a car for? I'm living in a nursing home. But we can have the person that's supporting their loved one have the vehicle, drive the vehicle, and that can be exempt. And so those are the kinds of things that we look at when we talk about spend down. And of course, the house, we can make improvements. It's an exempt asset. So we're taking, you know, countable resources and we're making those improvements to the house, maybe getting it ready for sale, that kind of stuff.
That's great. Awesome information. Eric, I think that pretty much wraps up our questions for you today. I just really appreciate you taking the time. I know you're a busy man, and I know you've got a lot of people that you help on your plate. And so we really appreciate your time. We really appreciate the answers to some of these common, frequently asked questions about Medicaid planning. And we're really hopeful that this can be a great resource and asset to our clients. So thank you again. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Hopefully this was helpful. Thank you, Ellie, for being with us and sharing about how your services differ from maybe some other traditional real estate people. And I think that's all we got for today. So thanks again, Eric, and thanks again, Ellie.
Okay, thanks, guys. Take care.
Guys.